Hi, folks. I don't know why it looks like my office light is as bright as the sun. I don't know how to deal with that. But this is part two for week one, although I might encourage you to revisit this on week four or five. So this might count for two. I'm going to talk about um, endurance of cosmopolitan or urban centers in indigenous context. So it's kind of going to be a historical look, like very historical. But hopefully this will give some kind of broader overview. Uh, Come on, what's the deal? I want to just view the slideshow. Let's go here. View. There we go. All right. So, a text that I'm pulling from in thinking about these things is that's really powerful and a recent publication is by Chadwick Allen called Earthworks Rising. And so basically, he analyzes some mounds. Oh no. Oh no, come on. What is happening here? Go away. Sorry, I'm having some serious technical issues. Why is this positioned here? Okay, there we go. Whew. Things are like not where they need to be. All right. Something was blocking my ability to toggle between the slides. Okay. So Chadwick Allen has this book. Um, he's a native literature scholar, so he's looking at earthworks through this kind of literature lens and reading mounds as knowledge sites, so kind of like living libraries or living archives. And he thinks about uh triplicates of the word citing. So as in academic citation, as in using your eyeballs and like visually making connection, and as in place, like site location. And so those are kind of the three frameworks that he's looking at mounds with, and ask questions like how might earthworks be understood not only as built environments, but also as forms of information storage, transmission, and exchange. How might they be understood as systems of signs arranged into systematic patterns, as systematic encodings of knowledge produced through indigenous technologies and practices? So, in some kind of like libraries and archives. And this is a great little pull quote. Earthworks and earthworks complexes are not simply inert matter, dead physical material appropriate for standard archaeological methods of stratigraphy, which is analyzing the order and layers of the earth, and taxonomy, which is classifying various elements into standard categories. You're probably familiar with like uh, Latin names in terms of taxonomy, but it also applies to archaeology and geographic surveys of the earth. So Allen goes on, from many indigenous perspectives, earthworks are also embodied material, and earthworks are animate, assembled from vital earth during their planning, construction, and use. Earthworks are imbued with social, psychic, and spiritual power, which humans encounter physically, socially, spiritually, and through which humans encounter each other as well as other than human beings and forces. So basically, this quote is highlighting the animacy of land. And so if we're thinking about this, these mounds as spaces where that are living archives of knowledge, then they are approached kind of like elders. And these mounds were also cosmopolitan gathering places where many people would come at once and exchange knowledge and goods and connect with kin. And so, even though I'm looking back historically, um, the same phenomenon can be applied to urban cities. So that's kind of what I'm getting at long term in this lecture. I do want to make a note about, as I'm kind of talking about this older practice of mound building in archaeology, they kind of segment and fragment time based on certain civilizations or imposed categories. So, Allen is looking a lot at a mound building in the middle America to eastern seaboard. So, Um, that kind of goes into these sections called like Adena, Hopewell, and then for ancient cultures. But what is important for me to emphasize is none of those designations, none of those titles bear any relation to the actual peoples or cultures that they're attempting to describe. They are us looking back in time, segmenting things in ways that probably weren't segmented that way as they were lived. So just to bear that in mind when you're looking at the dates that are popping up. Some pretty remarkable mound sites are the Great Serpent Mound in Bush Creek, Ohio. This is an effigy type of mound, so it is made to look like another being. There's some dispute about whether it is a snake swallowing an egg or swallowing a sun, or if it's not swallowing anything and that's just kind of a head. Um, but it's over 1,300 feet long, with an average height of 4 to 5 feet. So it's very easily understood from above, but if you're walking on the ground, those are just small mounds, right? But that is an impressive feat of infrastructure. Um, if you are have heard of this before and have heard of this in pop culture, you might hear some people thinking about this through lenses of um, in a lot of mounds and a lot of earthworks get erroneously conflated with like aliens, right? But this was not an alien design, and that's discounting a lot of indigenous technology and capability to entertain those ideas. This was definitely indigenous inhabitants to the area. Um, Collaborating with the earth and doing some terraforming. Um, it the serpent has a lot of alignments with cosmological phenomena. So there's solar alignments with the head and tail, and then kind of its serpentine wiggles back and forth can align with the solstices and the equinoxes. So it's kind of an embodied calendar and timekeeper as well. Um, Alison Adele Hedgecock um, talks about the mound in poetic form in this really beautiful book, Blood Run. So this is her poem. I'll read it to you all. Snake Mound, present invisibility. Need not concern. My weight remains heavy upon this land, winding, weaving, in curve, mouth undone for egg swallow. Through my body, suffered sacrifice to railway fill. My vision bears all even still. Be not fooled. Be not fooled. I will appear again. Sinuous I am. And so what Hedgecock is kind of doing is very much in line with how um, Chadwick Allen was analyzing these mounds because up until his publication, most of them had been analyzed by archaeologists and people who were trained in kind of Western visual culture. And so narratives were established that maybe didn't make connections to contemporary Indigenous people, didn't draw that continuity of creative expression. And so here is an example of that, right? Allison is a native person. She is returning to the Snake Mound. She's collaborating with it. And also by making the Snake Mound the speaker in the poem, acknowledging the animacy of the land. Because I'm a nerd about animals and non-human collaborations, I'm always really struck by earthworks and who they're most visible to, which is our winged relatives. So, Alan was thinking that something similar and notes that when you kind of study a detailed map of the Brush Creek, which runs parallel to the Serpent, um, you can see that south of the Serpent is this image, is this Buzzard's Roost Rock, which is in the image. And it got named that because of the large number of turkey and black vultures that regularly circle the air. There's some really nice currents for them to get height coming off of that bluff. And so then they would congregate on the exposed rock. And so Alan puts forward this idea that, they have some of the best view of it. And maybe some of the design in making the serpent was thinking about who was going to be viewing this. And this is Alyssa Hinton, who is Afro-Indigenous in Tuscarora and Osage. And this is what Alan used for the cover of the book. And Hinton has a wonderful series of works where, as a contemporary Native artist, she's interacting with mound representation and thinking through histories of mound building and land and also gathering spaces. And she makes very clear. First of all, the hawk and winged beings, seeing the unseeable, standing in her piece as a message for change, reminding people of their potential. But so she's very clear in noting the way that mounds appeal to the visualities of birds. And then she also visually makes some strong suggestions that mounds not only carry knowledge, but by carrying knowledge, and then also sometimes being resting places, they are like wombs. And so they're carrying bodies and they're carrying culture. And that, just to contrast, this is a settler kind of historical archaeological rendition of a dig of a mound. And so you have those strata, and you have some artifacts. Also, the labor here is very explicit, right? Um, so we see who was literally doing the digging and the unearthing, and just a very different overall feel, but also understanding of the layers and of the context compared to Hinton's reimagining of a mound. And she talks about her work and the importance of using mixed media to make her work, the idea of the composite, as involved with piecing together photographic elements, the original hand rendered art, and digital rendering to create a hybrid art form. It's like an elaborate refinement process where layers of meaning filter through to convey a story. So she even thinks through the mediums that she's using and the way that she is engaging with mounds to revisit them visually as a certain kind of mound building um, itself. Hey, guys, let's chill out. Sorry, I'm talking to my dogs. Let's just take a chill. Um, so here's another one of Alyssa's pieces, a different mound. The series of work where she's thinking about mounds is called Spiritual Ground. You all right, bud? Okay. And maybe you've heard of the Great Serpent Mound, maybe you haven't, maybe you've heard of Cahokia. And so this was kind of what I was leading up to, were these large built sites, born of the land that supported many, many, many people, and large, vibrant, and diverse indigenous communities. And so Cahokia is a really, probably the most well-known example. Um, Especially in like Middle America. So you can see Cahokia is on what is now kind of the border between Illinois and Missouri, very close to the Mississippi River. So there was a lot of transportation through the Delta and through rivers. And here's what it looks like today if you went and visited. And here's an imagining and a archaeological rendering of what it probably looked like during its heyday. So you can see that is a huge amount of infrastructure, many people living there, um, making use of the land, broad community. Um, so another point to think about when we're thinking about the long-term history of um, urban spaces. And I'm so sorry, I've got to pause this really quick. Okay. Oh. All right, you guys need to leave. Go, go, go. Go, go, go. Go outside. Go, go, go. You guys are gonna leave. Leave, 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 leave. Yep. Thank you. Okay. All right. Sorry. I don't think I stopped the recording, so that's whatever. Um, so one thing when we're thinking about the long-term history of people gathering in places and living together is we have some oral history of it, but in when we're thinking way back, when we're thinking like Cahokia, we might not have robust oral records. We might have some visual culture, and then we have the land, which, as Allen argues, is holding knowledge itself. But a lot of the ways that we've approached looking at sites and looking at visual culture uh, is through, like I said, a Western kind of archaeological and anthropological frame. And what many indigenous archaeologists and scholars of history have argued is that we might need to adjust the methods that we're going about um, producing this knowledge from these kind of Western assumptions. And so Allen talks about relational archaeologies, which are concerned with how humans interact not only with each other, but also with various aspects of the physical world, which is inclusive of land, water, non-human animals, plants, and a broad range of material situated in the physical world. And so one example of someone doing that kind of work is Mary Weismantel. She's a relational archaeologist and specialist on pre-Incan indigenous cultures in Peru. So she's applying this relational approach to her work with indigenous cultures. Um, and she argues that her work demands an active body that absorbs knowledge kinetically to enable her to perceive and understand things that have happened in the past, these ancestors correctly. And so Allen carries that argument through, saying that mounds kind of require a purposeful movement through them and on them and under them, if there are tunnels, in order to perceive them on their own terms. And I'm pairing this with a copper plate, which was made in Cahokia in the mound structure that I was just showing, but was unearthed in a complex in present-day Georgia called Etowah. And so there were robust exchange and trade networks that linked these larger gathering sites. Here's some more images of Cahokia. Another one of these sites that has been well documented are the Spiro Mounds in eastern Oklahoma. So they're Caddoan culture, and there are people laid to rest there. But there have also been many uh, artifacts and visual culture unearthed from that space that really attests to how connected this space was in terms of indigenous peoples from all over Turtle Island or North America. And we're able to see that through. Here's an ear spool with a bird motif, which was again unearthed in Spiro, but is likely kind of from the Great Lakes area, potentially Anishinaabe, Thunderbird. Uh, Here we have an other than human person pipe. These were popular further south, although it could have been a Mississippian making, but that meant that people were exchanging visual culture from more southern territories. Um, an effigy face with deer antlers, likely eastern woodlands, and then this engraved gorget with folks holding rattles and drums, doing some ceremony. And you have to think too about not only what's being depicted, but also the material. that's being worked with. So this is a shell, and you think the Spiro mounds are in very inland, middle of the U.S. in Oklahoma, right? So people were bringing these materials from the coast, um, likely a Cherokee work because of the spider here. And here's a contemporary jar just to kind of like bring that full circle. What's pretty cool is if you this is um, uh, piquing your interest at all, these are all from the Oklahoma History Center, which has a really great open access archives. And so you can look by collection. So we've been looking through the Spiro collection, and then they kind of link out to, they also have excellent contemporary Indigenous art as well. So another example, I'm just going to give you a couple examples to kind of think about as we're talking through urban spaces in most of our lectures in a much more contemporary framework. But I thought it might be interesting just to think really, really broadly about this. This is what's now called Poverty Point in West Carroll Parish in Louisiana. Um, Current estimates say that this is 3,600 years old. But what's really fascinating is that this was built in a very short amount of time, 3 months. There is an effigy component. So on the map, you can see the bird mound. That is the effigy. And again, um, scholars and visitors are thinking that that was again a way to communicate with birds, specifically the red-tailed hawk. And what's really interesting too, when you think about if that is a way to communicate to the hawk people, then and it was made in 3 months. A fascinating connection is that the total time needed to create a red-tailed hawk, meaning from mating to a fledgling leaving the nest, is approximately 90 days or 3 months. Leanne Howe, who's another really excellent Indigenous scholar, makes the argument that perhaps the bird mound at this larger robust complex of Indigenous peoples was a performance mound that embodied the story of the red-tailed hawk from conception to first flight. So a literally territorially embodied creation story there for the red-tailed hawks, about the red-tailed hawks, and inspired by very scientific, precise knowledge about life cycles of red-tailed hawks, right? Okay, so here are some images of both. This is a historical rendering of what this might have looked like, and then a contemporary photograph. Um, and so just a reminder, because I am focusing on non-human kin here, partially because it's my research interest, but also because I think it's very easy to get in the mind of talking about an urban space and only talking about the human experience. But here we can see, even across time, that there have always been more than human beings in those spaces, and also inspiring those spaces. So this is Dr. Kim Tallbear again. I brought her up when talking about genetics, but she also is a very strong voice in advocating for attention to more than human beings in Indigenous scholarship. And so she's kind of speaking back to, if you're familiar with like Donna Haraway or kind of popular people who talk about other than human beings, they often get thrown into a scholarly space of new materialisms. And this is her kind of speaking back to that. She says the field of new materialisms has starting points that only partially contain Indigenous standpoints. First of all, Indigenous peoples have never forgotten that non-humans are a gentle being engaged in social relations that profoundly shape human lives. In addition, for many Indigenous peoples, their non-human others may not be understood in even critical Western frameworks as living. Objects and forces such as stones, thunder, or stars are known within our ontologies to be sentient and knowing persons. So even though I've been placing emphasis on animals, I think it's also important to be thinking again about the materials that are going into structuring these spaces, the stones, the dirt, the astrological alignment that's come into play. Okay, just because we were just looking at Louisiana, I also wanted to think about this history of enduring urban practice in the space of New Orleans.
You taking a year-long process and hand sewing and hand beating suits just for culture's sake. So it's a very, very passionate thing to actually be involved in this tradition. The Black Carnival traditions of New Orleans started out of resistance. Africans who came here during the transatlantic slave trade, when they rebelled against slavery, they ran off into the maroon communities with the indigenous, and they would hide them from the slave masters. So the way that we pay homage to those indigenous folk for doing that was to create this tradition that we call the masculine Indian tradition. They started calling us Mardi Gras Indians. That wasn't a name that we gave ourselves. We used the term Black masculine Indian to make the distinction that when we pay homage, we're mainly speaking of the people that was able to hide us. And you can't hide people if you don't look like them, right? There was many folk here, Black folk of African descent, who were indigenous to Louisiana many years before the transatlantic slave trade, Black Indians. And that's who we're actually paying homage to.
See, nobody down don't know how I make a caterpillar crawl a slippery wall. And when I get it to the top, I dance.
I'm not sure exactly when it started, but I do know that Blacks wasn't allowed to do Mardi Gras or Europeans in the French Quarter. We had to utilize European holidays to mask our African carnival traditions in the streets and neighborhoods. So the significance of Mardi Gras Day was really about being able to come out on the streets without needing a permit from the city. There's three parts to being an Indian. One is masking. Once you put a mask on, you become the energy or entity of what it is that you're masking. It's an African tradition. The other is procession. You're taking that mask and you procession in the streets and the neighborhoods. The other part is the ritual, taking a year-long process and hand sewing and hand beating these suits. You have Africa in it. You have indigenous in it. You have native in it. And you also have the innovation of New Orleans that's all present in the suit. The unique thing about the suits is you can use your own creativity. Your color is always your choice. Your subject matter or your theme, that's your choice as well. So you have the ability to be as creative as you want to be. It's a 100-pound suit, so it's very heavy. Like they would say, pretty in the front and pretty in the back. Be a golden feather hunter, we dress like that. You want to try to be pretty. It's a lot of vanity in it, so you still a little bit vain. So it's just a term that we use. Now it's about the prettiest, who make the nicest suit, even though, that's just a very small part of the culture. It's a year-long process, so you might take you a month to just design a suit. And then after that, you actually sewing. Mardi Gras morning, we always, what they call come out. The community would be outside waiting because you're not really doing this for yourself. You're doing it for the community. Your suit all year long that you're sewing is really a secret. People shouldn't see it until you come out. So that's what everybody's really waiting on, just to see what you came up with that year. Once we come out together, then we start our route on actually going out to meet tribes. When you actually meet a tribe, we battle with the suits, with the craftsmanship. Nobody wants to whom bow, we call it. Mean bow down on that dirty ground. So when you hit the streets and battle these tribes, that's what you're battling for. Nobody wants to take a year and do something and then whom bow to another chief. When you design something in your head and at the end of the year, you see that design meeting the expectation or sometimes exceeding the expectation. The beauty of it, it becomes addictive. That's why I say there's no such thing as an ugly suit, because if you took the time, the commitment, the tenacity, the endurance, it takes a lot to do that. To like the culture, enjoy the culture, respect the culture, that's one thing. But when you're a practitioner of it, you live in it, that's all of the above. And I think as a practitioner, it becomes a way of life. So the passion is really about understanding how important it is for this tradition to live.
All right, amazing. So, there's a lot going on in that video, and you could, most definitely leverage critiques at potentially some of the things happening there. But I do want to emphasize that it's my understanding that many of the people who are engaging in that masking tradition do have Choctaw, Huma, Chitimacha roots, and that's their way of melding their African roots with their Indigenous American roots and continuing some of their ceremony and some of their practice, and also just solidifying their community in the urban space of New Orleans, which also just kind of has its own distinct culture as an urban space, then as an indigenous urban space and as a um, Black African space and a diasporic space. So there's layers going on there. Uh, this is just a performance piece by Leanne Howe and Monique Mojica that you can check out. Actually, the link to this is embedded in the slide, but they just say something really potent here that I wanted to draw to the fore in their performance, which is Mojica says, the land is our archive, and our embodied relationship to the land defines Indigenous identities, history, science, cosmology, literature, and our performance. And so Mojica is um, saying something a little bit different than what Dr. Lobo was saying about space. And Mojica speaking broadly about land, but I do want to again emphasize, how is that applying to the urban space? Here's another great thinker within American Indian scholarship, Alfonso Ortiz, who is also a well-known Tewa poet and author. And he writes in 1974, as we would learn from any good traditionalist, Indian traditions usually exist more in space, in a specific place, than in time. It's no accident that some of us who happen to be Indians as well as scholars place the word space before time when we write. Any historians who overlook this fact run the risk of proceeding into the writing of Indian history without taking the most sublime Indian values into consideration. So again, just emphasizing land and relations to place, which urban environments were built on top of and in collaboration with, but did not erase entirely, right? They might have shifted it. This is a larger quote from Tara Millian, who is a Cree archaeologist. But again, I think it's very prescient. She says practicing archaeology within an Aboriginal philosophy transforms the person of the archaeologist. The archaeological site becomes a ceremonial area, and the archaeologist a ceremonial practitioner. In addition to being the holder of a sacred site, the archaeologist is the holder of artifacts and ecofacts, all sacred objects given by an aware archaeological record, like what Alan was arguing for, a animate land. An Aboriginal archaeologist is the locus for a relational web that incorporates past, present, future, living and non-living, academic and community, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal. As an embodiment of the Axis Mundi, and we actually just saw some visual representations of Axis Mundis, the central connecting pole of the universe or of a physical space. She receives powerful gifts from the animate archaeological record that carry the obligation of redistribution and reciprocity throughout all of these relationship networks. So as one kind of goes into looking at histories of the land, Tara is saying there is an obligation to carry that forward. And so I just wanted, I looked a lot at the kind of mound sites. And so now I'm just going to give you a little brief survey of other very critical gathering spaces across what is now the United States, sometimes branching into some of our neighboring contemporary settler state nations. But you likely have knowledge of more. So, feel free to add in our discussion this week if you've been places, other places to add into the lecture. This is Writing on Stone, which is a Blackfeet and Cree meeting site. There is also record of, this is really interesting. I won't tell this story. You can look it up, but there was a RCMP camp right across the river. And so a lot of the petroglyphs and record keeping also, had indigenous observations of settler surveillance, which I think is very interesting. Um, in a similar territory in Alberta, so again, that's Canada, but let's like think pre-colonial divisions here. Um, this is Head Smashed In Buffalo Jump, and so it's a buffalo run site. So bison would be run over the cliffs, but then there's a lot of story that ties into this place, and even plains nations that were migratory that were following bison, such as Blackfeet Nation and the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes 4 tribes on either side of the medicine line. They would return to spaces just as the buffalo would, and so this was a very popular summer camp to my knowledge, and so there were many people here, even though they weren't maybe building on the land. The archaeological record does reflect that there were many bison jumped here, and then also just the presence of lodges. So these medicine wheels or TP rings, right? They're the heavy stone that's going to hold down your lodge, um, the hide that is the dressing for your lodge. Sometimes they were left in honor of someone who maybe passed in that space, and sometimes they were kind of left out of necessity. And probably the most well-known of these is the Bighorn Medicine Wheel in Wyoming. Such a large space, right? We know people were gathering here, likely for ceremony, and continue to come back to this space. As you can see, the bison skull and all the people who visit tie fabric tags onto the or cloth onto the uh, fence that surrounds it. So, we don't even have to have the mounds to have this remembrance built into the land about large numbers of people coming and gathering and collaborating. I just kind of focused on the Mississippian area and the Eastern Seaboard to Middle America because they're just like mini in a compressed space. But out here in the Southwest, we also have several. So Chaco Canyon, especially the Great House or Pueblo Bonito, one of the largest great houses of the Chaco Canyon, large number of kivas. So you can see the circles here in these aerial photographs. People are laid to rest here, and there are many ceremonial goods. Some are thinking that this was more of a ceremonial center than a domestic residence, so people would not be staying here long term. Um, uh, it's possible, could be either way. Here's another strong example of a freestanding, isolated kiva. It's so large, though, even though this wasn't supporting a community full time, this was most certainly a gathering space, right, in New Mexico. Oh, good. It's just nice to kind of see things in motion sometimes, even if this is like National Geographic, whatever, but it's just nice to see moving image.
Perched on the cliff sides of the Mesa Verde Plateau exist the remnants of prehistoric Pueblo Indian settlements. For nearly 700 years, the ancestral Puebloan culture flourished in what is modern-day southwest Colorado. From the 6th to 12th centuries, elaborate villages were constructed on the mesa tops, canyons, and cliffs. Of the 4,400 archaeological sites that have been identified in the area, one of the more famous is Cliff Palace on Chapin Mesa. Some 24 Native American tribes consider the site to be their ancestral home. Constructed of sandstone and mud mortar, the multi-story Cliff Palace has 150 rooms. Mesa Verde National Park was the first archaeological site in the world to be protected by law in 1906, even before the establishment of the national park system.
So that's just one of our cliff dwelling uh, uh, complexes, and there are several in Arizona and the Four Corners region. That was in Colorado. Very close to our university. I don't know if everyone's located in here in Tucson, but is Casa Grande, which is near present day Florence. Um, when I was there, I actually found this dog. So there's me and this sweet girl who is now lives with one of my friends. Um, so just, more than human kin or come into all kinds of places. So it's thought that this was established in AD 1300. And so there was a permanent residence, and then likely a ceremonial space as well. It's just pretty impressive in terms of the height. I don't think the photos do it justice at all. If you've been there, then you'll know. But yeah, it's really amazing. And again, just thinking about the infrastructure and in terms of people and labor and materials and time, you will have to have a robust community there, right? So we know that there have been large groups of indigenous peoples all over this continent, and they've made space and then moved space, and some continue to occupy that space. So Taos Pueblo being still occupied today, but something that has endured over centuries. Again, not wanting to totally restrict our thoughts to this class focuses on the US, but especially since we're thinking historical pre-settler colonial borders, I just wanted to make mention too of a couple other sites. So Teotihuacan near present-day Mexico City. Here's a little video, so again, we can kind of get the walkthrough tour.
The City of Gods, the pre-Hispanic city of Teotihuacan. The history of Teotihuacan is believed to go back to the 2nd century BC. It developed into a large city and a center of ancient Mexican culture. However, it was abandoned during the middle of the 7th century. The ruins were later found by Aztec people advancing onto the Mexican Central Plain during the 14th century. The Aztecs believed that it was a sacred place where the sun and moon was created, and they named the site Teotihuacan, which means the place of gods. This temple enshrines Quetzalcoatl, the most important god in Central America. Quetzalcoatl means the feathered serpent. Its shape resembles the flow of a meandering river. Quetzalcoatl was worshipped as the god of life and rich harvest. This temple also enshrines the main god of Teotihuacan. It is Tlaloc, the god of water. Tlaloc has large eyes, jaguar-like tusks, and rules the underworld. Tlaloc, the god of the underworld, resides in a place deep underground where the water from heaven and the underworld meet. It is here that Tlaloc regenerates life. It was believed that the underworld, earth, and heaven were connected and constantly rotating. Sacrifices of living human hearts were made to provide the sinking sun in the west with enough power to rise again in the east. The Aztec people believed that this abandoned giant pyramid was where the gods created the sun and named it the Pyramid of the Sun. The sun was the center of Aztec worship. People in recent years have started to flock to Teotihuacan on the day of the spring equinox. The day when the sun passes right above the pyramid at noon. People hold their hands up and open their palms towards the sun. The ancient people's awe to the power and blessing of the sun is vividly recreated here.
Great. And then just in terms of, trade and infrastructure, bears noting the royal road constructed by the Inca Empire through Peru and Chile. Just an amazing feat of travel infrastructure. Bringing us up to Machu Picchu, a very well-known site. We can walk it.
The stone city of Machu Picchu is one of the most fascinating archaeological sites on the planet. Located northwest of Cusco, Peru, Machu Picchu is a testament to the power and ingenuity of the Inca people. During its prime, the Inca civilization stretched about 2,500 miles along South America's Pacific coastline, from modern-day Ecuador down into Chile. This distance is nearly the horizontal width of the continental United States. Machu Picchu, located at the center of this once expansive empire, is one of the few well-preserved remnants of the Inca civilization. Built around the mid-15th century, Machu Picchu is a stunning example of the Incas' engineering feats. The Inca constructed Machu Picchu's palaces, temples, terraces, and infrastructure using stone, and without the help of wheels or tools made of steel or iron. One particularly notable aspect of their construction is foregoing the use of mortar, a material often used to bind stones together. Nonetheless, the stones of Machu Picchu were cut so precisely that they snugly fit together. Located on two fault lines, Machu Picchu often experiences earthquakes, but because of the stone's exceptional cut and fit, they bounce during tremors and then are able to easily fall back into position. These engineering marvels have preserved Machu Picchu's remarkable condition for over 500 years. Machu Picchu's purpose is still a mystery to many archaeologists. Some theorize that it may have served as a ceremonial site, a military stronghold, or a retreat for nobility. The site's geographic layout may be significant in another way. Many of both the man-made and natural structures appear to align with astronomical events. But in the early 16th century, only about 100 years after it was built, Machu Picchu was abandoned. And since the Inca had no written language, no records exist to explain the exact purpose of the site. Although local communities knew about Machu Picchu, the site remained largely unknown to the outside world for hundreds of years. Spanish conquistadors who invaded the Inca civilization in the 16th century never came across the site. It wasn't until the early 20th century when Melchor Arteaga, a local farmer, debuted Machu Picchu to outsiders when he led Yale University professor Hiram Bingham to the site. Bingham and successive explorers devoted much of their academic careers to studying the archaeological wonder. Despite its enigmatic nature, Machu Picchu still stands as one of the world's most important archaeological sites. It is a testament to the power and ingenuity of one of the largest empires in the Americas. In 1983, UNESCO designated Machu Picchu as a World Heritage Site, and today, visitors from around the world come to pay homage to this piece of history. The stone city of Machu Picchu is
Okay,
one of the most
Great.
fascinating.
Gotta back out here. I actually forgot to share something I was just going to add to Casa Grande is to the ancestors of Autumn people that there is a huge complex of canals kind of at the confluence of the Gila and the Verde rivers that must have supported a large community. There's not as many great visual representations of that. Um, uh, but if you want to see them, I actually know Dr. Tristan Reeder, who I think is teaching the food sovereignty class, has them and speaks on them in his class. So, a really great, very local application of thinking about urban space and the endurance of infrastructure. So that's all for thinking through a historical survey of gathering spaces. And that's all for this week. Thanks.